He believes that the soul of a business lies in the people, not the spreadsheets. His key skill is getting people to see, think, and feel differently about how to grow themselves, their teams, and their company. Marketing guru Rishad Tobaccowala has been named by Businessweek as one of the top business leaders for pioneering innovation, and Time magazine has highlighted him as one of the top 5 marketing innovators. He's the author of the best-selling book, Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data. Rishad is a senior advisor to the Publicis Groupe, the world's 3rd largest communications firm, and has served most recently as its Chief Growth Officer and Chief Strategist. Over the span of his 37-year career in marketing, Rishad has also served as a chairman of Digitas and Razorfish. Rishad is also the chairman of the Tobacoowala Foundation, which helps 10,000 people in India gain access to better healthcare and education. Let's hear it from the man himself on Coffee with Rishad.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sanjay Kumar from Geospatial Media. I have a great pleasure to welcome you this morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, to join us today with Rishad Tobaccowala. Rishad is very well-known personality and a very nice human being who has been inspiring thousands of people. He led an organization with about 80,000 people. And what is great about it that he continued with that organization for 37 years, which is Publicis Groupe. Being a marketing guru, he has bachelor's in economics from Sanjay College and an MBA from United States. Having studied economics and MBA, he chose to go into the media business. And one of the digital transformers, and then he wrote a book. Well, many of us believe that this book is a kind of response to COVID, but it is not. This book was released earlier in January, and this book was already in debate and discussion since last October itself. The book is all about restoring soul of business, how to stay human in the age of data. And we all have this question. But the importance of technology we have seen amid this COVID situation. And we are actually reinventing ourselves every day in our personal, social, and professional life. But at the same time, we have someone like Rishad who can help us understand reinvention better. So I would welcome Rishad to share his thoughts with us and inspire us. Rishad, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for all of you all over the world who are attending this webinar. The plan is I am going to speak for 15 minutes. So it is now around 8:03 a.m. in my time, which is Chicago, and I guess 6:33 in Bombay at different times in the rest of the world. So I will speak for the next 15 minutes. And I'm going to sort of give you some thoughts about some of the highlights of my book, why I wrote my book, and some of the implications on the world moving past COVID-19. So to a great extent, a lot of people believe that I wrote my book because 6 of my 12 chapters. Let me tell you first how I crafted the book and why I wrote it. So as has been mentioned, I've worked in business for 38 years. And for about the last decade, I worked all over the world until we stopped flying. I would fly about 140 flights a year. And I'd be in Asia about 10 to 12 times a year, Europe 10 to 12 times a year. In fact, I was in Wuhan in China 2 times, but the only last time was 4 years ago. And what I discovered was that wherever I went in the world, people would ask me certain questions, and it didn't matter whether the person was young or old, whether they were a client, they were a media company, technology company, and it didn't matter what country they came from. What I began to realize is when I understood the questions they were asking and I would write them down, mostly people asked me a couple of questions, 3 questions, but I put them all down and they were the same 12 questions. And they liked my answers. So at some particular stage, I decided I was going to write a book, but I had a problem with books in nonfiction business books. And most nonfiction business books don't sell much. So to give you an idea, the average nonfiction business book sells approximately 5,000 copies in its lifetime if it is successful. So hardcover, paperback, globally, Audible, Kindle, 5,000 if you're lucky. And I was trying to figure out why they only sold 5,000. And many of them actually sell 400 or 500. And it was very clear there were 3 reasons. The first is most books are written for not written for the reader, they're written for the writer, which is one of the reasons I basically asked and was deciding to address the 12 questions people were asking me, rather than just because I want to feel like writing a book, I'm going to write a book. The second, as you'll probably know, most nonfiction business books should have only been 1 chapter long. It's 1 chapter that's repeated 12 times. So most nonfiction business books, if you read the first chapter, you got it, or you read the last chapter, you've got it. So they waste your time, basically. They repeat. And the third is they're filled with case studies. And case studies that are completely outdated usually because it takes about 1.5 years to get a book done. But more importantly, the best case studies are never shared or you don't get access to. So if you write a book that's not for any audience, that is outdated the day it is written and should have been 1/12 the size, it sort of explains why only 5,000 copies are sold. So in effect, I decided to write something different. While I used, and I was fortunate to have a major publisher, which is HarperCollins, which is one of the 2 largest publishers, and I talked to both Penguin Random House and HarperCollins, and they gave me an advance to write the book, and it's been published globally. So in that way, I was formal. It's available in a book, and obviously Kindle and Audible and CD-ROM and ebook, but it's a professional publisher. But there were 3 key things. One is I'm only talking and answering questions that people asked. And some of the questions are like this. How do I extract meaning from mathematics? So I've got an undergraduate degree in math. We're living in this data-driven world. Second is, how do you manage teams when they're working across screens? It sounds very much like a post-COVID-19 question. A third is, why does change suck? We're dealing with change. A fourth question is, what is it like to lead under pressurized circumstances? Guess where we are today? But these are not because they're COVID-19, because these are human questions. And my biggest fundamental learning was, therefore, let me answer these questions, but let me answer them in a way that you can read the answers to any of these questions in any way. So instead of writing a compact disc where you have to listen to the whole thing, I've got a Spotify playlist. So you can read any chapter in my book in any order. So I reinvented the book, though I did it in the book format, which allows people to read the chapter they want first, which basically means if they select their own chapter, they're likely to like it. And so they'll read other parts of it. So I found a very interesting way of doing personalization, which is through self-personalization. But as importantly, there is a theme that connects all the chapters. So it's not a book of essays. And the theme was the underlying problem that I began to understand in business, which is because we were living in an age increasingly where data and technology were becoming intensely important, businesses were focusing a lot on spreadsheets, data, stock market prices. And much to my surprise, companies that focus on data, stock market prices, and the short term eventually end up with having the worst stock market performance. And eventually it's not 10 years, it's 3 years. 2-3 years after they start this, their stock price starts going down. So interestingly, the people who were using data to justify that they were doing data were actually doing silly decisions. And the most successful companies actually were companies that were combining the story and the spreadsheet. So the spreadsheet is the data, the math of the business. The story is the culture, the employees, and the values of the business. So if you think about it in the United States, we have a company called Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo decided that they needed to open as many accounts as possible. They incentivized everybody to open as many accounts as possible. And people looked the other way. They didn't care how you opened the accounts. So what did people do? They opened fake accounts and accounts of dead people. They forced people to open accounts. And as a result, their stock price took a hit. They're on their fourth CEO in 5 years. And to this date, in the post-COVID-19, they continue to have cultural problems. So the short-term fixation really destroyed the company. On the other hand, you can have companies that are all about story. They don't understand that you need to have math and data, and you need to have a focus on also deliverables. And that's a company called WeWork. Think about WeWork. WeWork was valued at $64 billion by JP Morgan Chase, SoftBank, and Goldman Sachs in the fourth quarter of 2019. SoftBank valued it last week at $2.7 billion. Let me tell you that in addition to the fact that, Mayoshi Son isn't running a vision fund, he's running a delusion fund. He was lucky with one goddamn investment, two maybe, Alibaba and, Yahoo. And since then, he basically thinks he's the world's greatest visionary, where most of it is financial manipulation that has basically been done. But in addition to him looking pretty stupid, JP Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs can't be trusted. If they value a company at $67 billion and they try to take public, and then that company is valued at $2.7 billion, you begin to realize that people who are fixating on mathematics don't actually understand how the world actually behaves. On the other hand, companies that combine the two, and those are companies like Adobe, companies like Southwest Airlines, company like Domino's Pizza, those companies do the very best. They have happy customers, happy employees, very good products and services, and amazing stock price appreciation. And by the way, you can take the very same company and you can change the mindset from being a math mindset to a math plus meaning mindset, or I call it story and spreadsheet, and it can change the company. So give you an idea. A small little company called Microsoft, okay? For 10 years under Steve Ballmer, Microsoft's stock price stayed approximately in the $30 range. And what Steve Ballmer did, and I also got a chance to meet him, was he was basically a salesperson. He was not a technology person. He was a salesperson who basically yelled and screamed, Windows, 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 right? Developer, developer, developer. And all that he basically did, they did stack ranking. If you were in the bottom 10 to 20% of employees, you got kicked out. So employees used to fight with each other. They basically, because they were big, they threatened everybody. They introduced vaporware. So what did they miss? They missed mobile, they missed search, they missed pretty much everything. But there was a gentleman there who took over as the CEO 5 years or 4 years ago called Satya Nadella. And Satya Nadella basically said, enough is enough. So here's what he did. He gave everybody a book called Growth Mindset. And Growth Mindset actually is a book whose agent is the same as my agent. And he asked everybody to read the book. And he said, we're going to go from basically be a know-it-all company to a learn-it-all company. He got rid of stack ranking. His whole stuff is like, hey, we're going to be open. We're going to be open to Linux. We have to understand the future is the cloud, because he obviously created and was a big driver of Azure. And he said, screw Windows. There's no more Windows operating division. In the last 4 years, the company's stock price has gone up by 400%. So when people tell me that they make data-driven decisions and it's all about math, I said, you don't understand data or math. You actually are hiding behind the fact that you're not a good leader, right? I have an advanced degree in mathematics. I have an MBA from the University of Chicago in finance. I've led a lot of data stuff. And here are the 3 things I've learned. Data is extremely important. It's like electricity. But outside of a very few companies, tell me which company differentiates itself through the use of electricity today. So how many companies can actually differentiate themselves through the use of data? You can't operate with data, but it's very hard to differentiate with data alone. So in effect, what we're basically doing, that's number one. Number two, look at yourself and look at the last 10 decisions you've made. Tell me how many of those decisions, whether they were personal or business or personnel, were all driven primarily by data. And I basically say less than 30%, if you're like most people I basically talk to, right? And as importantly, in an age of AI, if you only make data-driven decisions, you've just lost your job. In effect, a machine can do it better. A machine can do a job better. A machine could basically, they had this thing. They had lawyers looking at NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, to find loopholes in them. So the average lawyer basically took about 10 minutes to go through a document, and they found 98% of the loopholes. They then let an AI machine do it. It took 6 seconds and found 99.5%. So in effect, if you're making data-driven decisions, it's not a leadership decision, it's not a differentiated decision, and it actually doesn't lead to good data results. So in effect, the book basically says you have to combine the story and the spreadsheet, and then it addresses some major issues. And some of the issues it addresses, and I'll quickly sort of give you some of the end results and then open it up for questions, are the following. The first is leadership actually matters. That people matter, leaders matter. And you can see that today everywhere in the world to the reaction of COVID-19, right? You basically have leaders who actually have stepped up and leaders who have not. And the other 5 characteristics of leaders that are successful. And these are 5 characteristics I believe that many of you all have, but you all should make sure that you all continue to have those and you continue to address those. So the first one is capability. You can't be a leader unless you're capable and competent. So you can't be a leader of doctors if you don't know medicine. You can't be a technology leader if you don't know technology. And you can't be a marketing leader if you have no clue what marketing is. So you have to have capability and competence. You can't be a leader just because you've got charisma. It doesn't work. So that's number one. Number 2 is integrity, which is people have to trust you. But integrity isn't just about trust or transparency. It's about, are you data-driven? Are you using science? Are you facing reality? Or are you living in some imagination world? Unless you're a writer like me who lives in an imagination world, you better be in the real world most of the time. So that's the second one. The third one, and so those two would be what would be, capability, competency, and integrity, trust, transparency, data, are probably, I would say, the spreadsheet part of the story, or spreadsheet part of leadership. The third part is empathy. Do you understand other people's perspectives? So for instance, today, all your employees or all your colleagues are not really working from home. They're working under duress in quarantine. Working from home is when you don't have to worry about health. You don't have to worry about whether you can go out or not. You don't have to worry where you're going to get your groceries. You don't fear about whether your job is going to be around or not. It's very, very different. Very different. The fourth aspect besides empathy is vulnerability. All of us really don't know what we're doing. We're facing a world we've never faced. We have to make dramatic decisions on business. Often we have to cut jobs, lose positions in order to make sure we stay alive and cash flow stays on. And we should share the decision that we are making decisions with a gun to a heart fast, and we may make wrong decisions. Are your leaders willing to say once in a while they're wrong? And the fifth one really is inspiration. The world will get better, and how are we going to inspire people to do that? So capability, integrity, empathy, vulnerability, and inspiration. So I've done a lot of study, and that's a chapter in my book called How to Lead with Soul, which talks about that, but also, by the way, which is really fun, is talks about what bad leaders look like. And hopefully you will get the book and you'll see what that is. But one of the ways a leader is bad is when they're a double-crossing assassin. And I'll leave you at that. So that's one. The other one is about change. I truly believe, as someone who's been very involved across the world with lots of different companies and a lot of different boards, that successful companies recognize that the only way a company actually changes is if the people change. So either you upgrade the people or you upgrade people's mindsets. And in fact, even the successful M&A is usually for talent and people and skill sets a company does not have. But change doesn't happen because you put out a press release or you have a strategy, right? And in effect, change sucks because people find it difficult to change. Like I, as has been said, have worked in the same company, which I've continued to remain an advisor to for 38 years. I've lived in the same city for 40. And I met my wife, and it was not a child marriage when we were 12, 48 years ago. So I hate change, right? So when someone comes to me and says, you should change, I say, I'm happy. Why don't you change, right? It's very interesting. Change is one of the things that people come and say you should do. right? Almost in every other case, they say, I've got a great restaurant, come with me, I'm going to take you to a great restaurant. Or let's have this great scotch. But in change, they don't say, let's change together. They say, you change. That's stupid, because the change sucks, because most of us in middle to senior management don't want to change, because in effect, we have to learn new things and we don't know what we do. But while change sucks, irrelevance is even worse. But to make change happen, it's very, very simple how it gets done. A, you've got to recognize it's about people. It's not about press releases, announcements, strategy documents, not about those. And if you want to get people to change, 3 simple things. Number 1 is you got to communicate, and explain why people have to change, and do it again and again and again. Because while the world is data-driven, silicon, and digital, people are analog, carbon-based, and feeling. We change slowly. Second is you have to provide incentives. So incentives could be obviously financial incentives or learning incentives or autonomy incentives, but I'm not going to change. So I find it so humorous that companies say, we're going to do something really cool. So I said, okay, tell me how you're incentivizing people. The senior people who run most of the money continue to get paid a lot to keep running the same way. And all the new people are supposed to take the risk. That isn't an incentive. They're going to leave to the company. So you're going to have all your talent leave, and you're going to have all your old people managing your current business, which often may be us ourselves, right? Behaving that way. So if your incentives are not about tomorrow's incentives, and you aren't putting some of your best talent against tomorrow's opportunities, but you're putting everything against where today's clients and revenue are, screw it. You ain't going to change. It's in your own delusional mind that you think you will, right? And the third one, besides incentives, as well as communication, is training. So I see companies stop training people, right? Not incentivizing right, communicating through press releases, and being surprised when no transformation actually happens. People are just like, oh my God, what happened? I said, well, wake up. This is what happened. So change sucks. And I'm going to leave you with the final thing, which is this, which is one of the most important things for all of us. And having seen some of the people who are in this, you are senior leaders, very successful individuals. And so you probably have done all of these, but this is one thing at least a doofus like me learned how to do, which is we spend a lot of our time, rightfully so, worried about what we eat and whether we exercise or not, because we are trying to make sure that we keep our physical operating systems going. It's important, especially today, we realize in the world of COVID-19, if you get sick and you die, it's not going to help if anything else doesn't work. So you've got to keep your physical operating system. But what separates us from monkeys is not our physical operating system, it's our mental operating system. But very few people are spending time figuring out what they put in their minds and how they exercise their minds. So one of the chapters in my book is called How to Upgrade Your Mental Operating System. And it's everything I've learned. And by the way, the way I did my book is I spent 18 months doing research. It isn't just my own experiences, which are pretty sucky, or what I've seen across the world, across hundreds of companies, which are interesting. But I did a lot of research on each of these topics, including how do people continue to learn. And I keep reminding people that most of us are going to have 50-year, 60-year careers. So yes, I've finished 38 years, but I hope to work for another 2 decades. So I better be relevant, and I can't basically think about what I learned about yesterday. So I will open it up for questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Rishad. This has been exciting and great, discussions. No, what I'm going to do is I'll have a couple of questions with you first, and then we'll bring some panelists who will be joining us to have an interaction with you, as well as we'll take some questions from the chat box. So you ended around, kind of, rebooting your mental, mechanisms and you also talked about change sucks. So when change sucks and the mental operating system is something which is driving your mind, so do you see that, we can think of rebooting our mental operating system?
Yes, we can. And the 3 tricks to it, and you can read all the details, in the book, but the 3 key tricks to it is number 1 is to spend an hour every day learning. So just like, some people say, I'm going to go for a walk, right? Or I'm going to do yoga, or I'm going to do exercise. So my step, you should spend an hour a day learning. And that is something not to do with your work. Sometimes you can learn about your work, but read literature, see an interesting movie, figure out some investigation, go on your web, use a new app, do something of the sort. So you have to constantly learn. So that's one. Get in the habit of learning for 1 hour a day. Second is try to do one new thing every day. And you can do one new thing even if you're under lockdown and quarantine. It might be like I started saying, I'm going to watch a new movie every day because I had the time. I was traveling less. And there's a collection called the Criterion Collection, which now is also on HBO Max. So I would see an amazing movie, a Kurosawa movie one day, a Bergman movie one day, a movie every day. Or I would do one new thing. It doesn't have to be spending an hour. It can be doing one new thing. Because when you do something new is when you're mentally alive. You're paying attention. So very much like when you're traveling and your flight gets canceled is when you start paying a lot of attention to what's going on. So to a great extent, do one new thing. But the most important and the hardest to do, especially for us who are in senior management, is try to build a case for the exact opposite of what you believe. Okay. So a big part of the reason I managed to keep my job and I succeeded, and when I spent a lot of time working with our CEO, and I would often go into his room and I would build a case for why everything he and I were doing was wrong. Okay. And the case was so strong that he would get red in the face. He would kick me out of the office, right? I'd go down, have a beer, then he'd call me back up and he'd basically say, how come you never told me this before? I said, no, I'm not saying that what we're doing is wrong. I'm building a case as to why we are. Now let's talk about whether we're doing it right or wrong. But unless you can build a case for the exact opposite of what you believe, how the hell do you know you even believe what you believe? And this is especially true today because we are living in a world that's increasingly polarized. So for instance, if you get most of your quote unquote content through your friends, through your search engine, through social media, I just want to let you know you're living in a fantasy world, okay? Because I will show you that everything is being customized to make you feel good about yourself and to engage you. So in effect, everything is complete. It's completely. I've actually shown people. I've said, okay, 7 people, open up all your Google homepages, open your Facebook page, open your. Just tell me who your friends are, and you're surrounding yourself with a bunch of incestuous people. And remember, incest gives birth to bastard children, like bastard ideas, and so to a great or misfit children. So what happens is you have to think outside the box, and the only way to do that is say you are wrong.
So, Rishad, we live in an age of artificial intelligence and we are surrounded by overload of data and overload of communication platforms. And we don't react to various kind of, posts on our social media. As you talked about, we are being made to feel that I'm like, left behind or I'm not caring about it. So in this age of, overload of information as well as overload of, comm platforms, how do you think that we can protect our creative innovation or creative thinking? How do we find the time to be, reading and creating our ideas, and for whom? We are disconnected from the, from the produce. Whatever we are doing for a global market, and we don't know how the users are or the consumers are going to use that information, information or product. So what is the connect between producer and user?
So there are 3 things, first of all. The first one is the answer of how to find time, okay?
Yes.
So people used to ask me, which is, how do you do all these things? And you also can have every meeting and everybody talks to you, you listen to them. Where do you find the time? And I said, okay, here are things I did. So there's actually a chapter in my book called How to Deepen Time Usage, right? Which is everything I've learned about time management. So the one thing about time management you must understand is do it very much like you do financial management. Because time is the only thing you have, and we can't create new time. So very often, it's also true for most people in financial management, is you've got a certain amount of a budget. You can't create something new. Obviously, you earn more the following year or whatever. So what I basically do is, if you say yes to something, tell me what you're going to eliminate from your calendar. So that's number 1. Number 2 is every 6 months, throw out all the things in your calendar and say which ones will you actually put back on your calendar. Because you'll find that 60 to 70% of your time, and you're going to find that today when you come post COVID-19, is so many things you were doing made no sense at all. Like I'm speaking to so many senior people in boardrooms. I'm getting into more boardrooms now than I've ever done before, or not boardrooms, but senior management. There's nobody getting in the boardroom. It's primarily because they don't have like all these gatekeepers and people, who are managing them. But they're saying is, we had so many people providing us with data and paperwork, and I'm not even talking to them. Did they do anything worthwhile? Right? So you have to basically think about that. But as importantly, to the answer of who, okay, I think you want to think about people, humans. Don't think about consumers, don't think about customers, think about humans. And I will tell you what humans want. Okay, it's very simple. On the material side, humans want money, power, and fame. Okay. And so can you give them money, power, and fame? And that's also true for employees, and including young employees. Money, instead of power, what they really want is autonomy, and for fame, it's recognition. But those are first order, but higher order is what your customers want, which is growth. Can they grow personally? Can their families grow? Can they grow? That's the first thing they want. The second that they basically look for is connection, right? Can they be more connected? Can they have more access? And the third is purpose and values, right? Do you resonate with their purpose and values? So one of the biggest things today, right, I'll tell you, is if you want to have a successful company, just focus on two things. Focus on people, and for God's sakes, focus on your employees. Because if you're telling me that you're a company with purpose and values, and if you cannot look after your employees, you are not true.
So,
right?
Rishad, in this case, tell me, so long the CEO or the leader of the company is a majority stakeholder in the organization, he has that liberty of making himself, take care of the people. But in the age of market-driven, economies, or the Sensex-driven or stock exchange-driven companies, where the board of directors, and you have been on the board of directors of your group, when the decision makers are actually absent from day-to-day operations, how do you see the connectivity and the responsibility of the business leaders to serve the interest of the absentee owners and then work with the people?
So I think the way you do it is you use data to convince them, okay? And the data is, there is a lot of books and there's a lot of data that shows that a company's success is highly based on the quality of its employees, right? It's no different than sports teams. If you don't have better players, so a good sports team has three common things. They have better players than most teams.
Yeah.
Second is their players actually work together towards a common goal versus fighting with each other. And third is they got good leadership, which is coaches, etc. And interestingly, but people forget, is you can't actually win by just having good coaches and people working together unless you've got at least better players.
Yeah.
And employees that when employees are more satisfied, companies do better. Why? For the following reasons. Number one is more satisfied employees means lower turnover. Lower turnover basically means less training costs, less friction, number one. Number two, if your employees are satisfied and they are happy, who do you think the customers of your company deal with? They deal with the employees of the company. They don't come and talk to a wall, right? Even when they talk to an app, there's some coder who's written the app. So the whole idea is your employees are your company. So in effect, you're basically saying, I don't care about my company if I'm not investing in employees. And the third and most importantly is that if you don't have good employees, how do you have innovation and change? So in effect, my basic belief is if there's a board of directors who basically tells me employees don't matter, I said, I need a new board. Right? And by the way, if the board sucks, get the hell out of that company. You'll be a failure as a CEO. And this is why the big thing that's now happening is people are speaking up, right? And remember, one of the key things like never before is people are saying, get out of my way, Jose, right? And that's what leadership is. Is it like, oh, board of directors, yes, I hate. Forget about it.
So basically, what you're saying is that either you actually have the ability to be the translator between the people's aspirations and the board's objectives, or
Yes.
or you just move out and find some other place.
But it's very important that you have to be also listening to the people, because it's very often that senior people like us, right? We have stopped connecting with people. So one of the things I have, one of my chapters in my book is called Good Meetings, right? Which is if you are not having unscheduled meetings with a lot of different people in your company, and you're only having meetings when you go through gatekeepers, you aren't even getting proper information about what's going on in your company, right?
Yeah.
People around you are managing you. And one of the times you always see leaders lose the plot is they have just a small group of people who are supporting them, and these people are blocking out, other information.
So, Rishad, one more question which I have to you is because you're so well connected with the world of innovation, and every time we talk about innovation, innovation, and innovation. However, innovation is not something which is new. I think the whole human civilization has evolved through innovations only. But what we see today is an overemphasis on disruptive innovation. So, where do you see that the companies should focus? Is it important to be innovative, or is it important to be more relevant to the people?
So it's both. So here's what basically happens. I think the two are combined. So I define innovation, and I have a lot of stuff on innovation too in my book. I define it as fresh, insightful connections. Okay, so fresh because it's obviously new, insightful because it's driven by people and people's needs, and connections as you're connecting things that already exist in completely new ways. Okay, but I will give you an idea with regard to COVID-19. I've been doing some stuff on COVID-19, and so in addition to getting the book, there's some of my new writings on COVID-19. Is you can, if you follow me on Twitter at Rishad, it'll send you links to that. Is my belief is the following: we are not going to, when we come back to a post-COVID-19, I'm telling all my clients and anybody I'm advising, you are no longer restarting your business, you are starting your business. Okay, and there are two reasons why. There's been nothing like this before, but the closest we have to this is 2008, 2009, which is the Great Recession. So you had a Great Recession, people's habits and behaviors were changing. And at the very same stage, something else was basically happening. Okay. And what was basically happening was new technologies were being formed. So I call it the first connected age was when you had search and e-commerce, which was 1997, built around the World Wide Web, Amazon, Google. In 2008, 2009, we entered the second connected age, which was basically the age of social media and smartphones. So we were now no longer just connected to commerce, connected to information. We were connected all the time and connected to everybody. And some new technologies were forming. So coming out of 2008, 2009, General Motors and Ford again started to focus on each other. But guess what was being born then? Uber, Tesla, right? Gillette and Schick were competing on blades, but what was being born was Dollar Shave Club and Harry's. So whenever you have new behaviors and new technologies, your consumer and your category changes. So we are now entering the third connected age, which is what I've written about in my book. And the third connected age, they build on the first. So yes, connect to search, connect to inform, connected all the time, connect to everybody, that all exists. But now it's connected to the cloud, data connecting to data, things connecting to things, which is IoT, new ways of connecting, which is voice, and much faster ways of connecting, which is 5G. All of that is coming when people's behaviors have changed post-COVID-19. Because post-COVID-19, people have started or stopped doing things for 60 days. So you're going to have consumers and customers behaving differently in an age of new technology. So innovation means, here's what I would say, restart your business by saying, how is your consumer or customer changing? And how would you start a new business using no constraints, accepting whatever you do has to be legal, has to use today's technology, and has to make money in 3 years or less.
Yeah, so Rishad, before we go to some of the guests who is going to have a chat with you, I would request Harsha, my colleague, to bring some guests online. I have a last question to you, is the fact that, during the COVID times, we have seen that we have been living with less. And you talk about, restoring soul of business. What do you think about restoring soul of need and consumption?
Well, the restoring the soul of business and the restoring the soul of need, because eventually the restoring the soul of business is through people, and people is really through what do you need? I mean, one of the key things.
Cody ने पूछा, मैंने accept किया.
Yeah. So most people, I think today who are on this webinar would probably say that they are using much less today than they were using before. They're using fewer clothes. Obviously, they're traveling less. They're eating out less because there's no way to eat. And you're beginning to realize, and this is a key thing all our research globally has found, is people are beginning to realize that they can do with less, right? And less material things, but they actually miss more human things.
Oh, thanks a lot, Rishad. Harsha, do we have our guest panelists online?
Yes, we have Cody joining us. Hi,
So
Cody.
Cody, can you hear us?
Good morning. I can. Yep.
Okay, go ahead. You are live with Rishad.
Yeah, very nice to meet you. Good morning. I'm Cody Cooper, Marketing Director at Turnbull Geospatial. I really resonated with your comments about leadership being kind of key in today's time, and I'm very fortunate to work for a group of phenomenal leaders, very human-driven leadership. Turnbull's also a very humble company. It's not something we brag about, and we certainly pride ourselves in that. Do you feel in today's stage that this is an important message to customers? You talked in your CDX webinar about communicating safety and security to customers right now, and part of that certainly comes from leadership. And I'm wondering if you feel like good leadership should be communicated, or that's just something you let the success speak for itself.
I think good leadership needs to be communicated because people are looking for leadership. And to a great extent, where countries have done relatively well or companies have done well is when leaders have basically led. And whether you're a servant leader or a forward leader, you have to actually lead and show up. And to a great extent, the challenges that we face in the United States is at certain levels, some of our leaders are showing up, certain mayors and governors, but at some other levels, without getting political, certain leaders are not showing up. And so obviously leadership is extremely important because people are looking for guides. So I think it's more important now than ever before. And I think organizations are beginning to recognize that. And it's human leadership, to your point. It's, it's the empathy, the vulnerability, which are interesting, the humility of it too.
Thanks, Rishad. This is very important because normally we at Geospatial industry believe that we are very under-marketed industry. And what Cody talked about, the great leadership at Turnbull, where in last 45 years of its existence, they had only seen 2 CEOs, and the third has just taken over in the first week of January. So that talks about the consistency of the leadership. Cody, you have any other question to Rishad?
Nope, thank you.
Thank you, Cody.
Thanks, Cody. Harsha, may I know who is other guest we have online? Arup, that's good.
Yeah, Professor Arup. Yeah, Professor Arup is here.
So, Professor Arup, Rishad has been with the Space Department since 1975, and he completed 40 years in the Space Department, and very rare combination of Stephens and Indian Institute of Science. So, Professor Arup, you have Rishad with you.
Thank you, and that was a wonderful talk, Rishad.
Thank you.
I have just 1 or 2 questions. One is, you said change sucks, but the point is, if change sucks, then how do we innovate? Because innovation cannot happen without change.
So change sucks, but irrelevance is even worse, which is why innovation must happen, right? But the only way you can actually make people change is to recognize that it sucks, right? And that it doesn't come naturally. And therefore, you have to basically train them, you have to incentivize them, and you have to communicate to them why it's important. But, in effect, if you don't change, I would tell people that I kept changing. And if you look at my LinkedIn profile, it looks like even though I've worked in one company, I've worked at 10 different companies. So my basic belief is I have to change in order to stay in this company. Because what people don't recognize is humanity is about change, right? And we grow through change. But when we are going through the change itself, usually it's really difficult. You know, it's good to be basically a caterpillar, it's good to be a butterfly, but that in-between thing looks really ugly.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
I just have one more point, and that is, you know, you talked initially about the mathematics part of it, you know, the spreadsheets and all that. One thing that I see now, at least in India, is that this huge fixation with GDP and the Sensex numbers. Why?
See, GDP and Sensex numbers are the equivalent of basically playing a tennis match and keeping your eyes on the scoreboard and not the ball or the other player. Okay? And that's the best way to explain it. It's just like we have the United States president who's deciding whether he's successful or not based on Dow Jones Industrial Index. Stupid.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was nice.
Thanks, Arup. Thank you very much. Harsha, do we have our next guest, from OGC?
Sanjay, Naren is there on the conference, but she's not joining as audience. I'm just waiting for her. Naren, can you raise your hands and I'll invite you to speak? Thank you very much.
In the meanwhile, Rishad, I'll take some questions from the chat box. There's a question from Anya from Germany. She's talking about, do we need to live in a kind of startup phase ever? Because you're talking of reinventing. So, reinventing means also having some kind of startup phase. And how can we make, in a startup kind of, phase, others successful as well? It's a challenge of reinvention as well as making others successful.
The reality of it is, if you think about life actually is duality. We're always grappling with two things at the same time. So I truly believe that the best companies, and if you read my book, my dedication is to my wife and to my parents. And what I basically say is they gave me roots and they gave me wings, right? Mm-hmm. And so what happens is the roots is the legacy of the company. The roots is the culture of the company, the DNA of the company. And the wings is basically how you continuously reinvent. And the most successful companies have managed to do the same. And the most successful people have managed to do the same. Now, we don't do it every single day, but I try to remind people that in many ways, every day when you wake up is a new day. And you really realize this when we have these kinds of experiences where, because the United States has had 100,000 deaths because of COVID-19. And, we've had 1/3 of all the cases in the world, so over 1.5 million. It's very rare that you don't know somebody who hasn't come close to dying because of this disease, right? So what happens is you've either experienced someone who's had a near-death experience, and as a result, you've projected it on yourself. And when you do that, you begin to think about life very differently. And so it's really odd that we get wisdom 10 minutes before we die. It's better getting it 10 years or 20 years before we die, which is what I explain to people. Every day is a new day, but by the way, you are you because it's connected to all the old days. So it's roots and wings.
Thanks, Rishad. I guess we have Nadine Alameh, the CEO of OGC, joining from Washington, D.C. Hi, Nadine. Rishad is live with you now.
Hi. So first of all, hello. Thank you so much for helping me start my day this way.
Thank you.
It's so great not to start with meetings, but actually inspirational talks. So appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Sanjay, for setting up like a not technical and not market, but actually I call it human. We're talking at the human level. I actually had questions prepared for you, but I think they're answered in your book. So I'm going to ask you one question that occurred to me as you're talking about change, and change sucks. So what do you say, or how do you deal with when people tell you, I'm the CEO of an international organization, we definitely need to change, as Sanjay knows. How do you deal when your board and your market says you have to change faster? You're not doing it fast enough.
Right. So what tends to basically happen is many companies have to change faster, but you have to recognize that the pace of change is driven by two very important people orientations. One is how fast can your people deliver on the change that you are promising? Because it's easy to change the promise and the deliverable, but it's harder to deliver. And so if you say you're doing this and your people aren't there, you begin to have a big problem. That is sort of one. The second is, how do you actually convince your customers that you are a new you? Okay, because legacy thinking doesn't only come from inside the company. Legacy thinking comes from customers. I've worked in businesses where I've had to change my business, but my customers have put me into a particular box. Okay, so to give you an idea, I started this transition from leaving Publicis and marketing to being basically an advisor, speaker, and writer. And that process began about 2.5 years ago. And right now it's about half done, because people still think of me as the guy who sells advertising. Okay, so that's the way to sort of think about it.
Thanks, Rishad. I got another question. Nadine, do you have any other question to Rishad?
No, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Perfect. And thank you for either reading my book or getting it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we have another question from Paul Jensen, and he talks about, hey, Rishad, tell me something about, is leadership something to learn, or it is veins?
So I believe that every human being has leadership capabilities. So very much like Tolstoy's book, Anna Karenina, which basically said, all happy families are the same and all unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. I basically believe that all good bosses share the same thing, but bad bosses are uniquely bad in their own way. And so to a great extent, the areas of good leadership, one of them isn't in your genes, it has to be trained, which is capability, right? You aren't born capable of doing what you're going to do. So training is very important. And the second one, to a great extent, which is more built on what you learn through your family and friends and society, is do you have some form of integrity? Okay, so I believe capability and integrity are taught to you, but the other ones, which are empathy, inspiration, and vulnerability, are human. You just have to unleash them.
So that's interesting, Rishad. There's a question to you, which is from Harpreet Singh. And he talks about that, how relevant is your book or your principles for small organizations? It looks like that your book is meant for large global organizations.
No, so my book is basically built for, the way I look at it is, the book is basically built for people. It makes you see, think, and feel differently about how to grow your company, your team, and yourself. So I actually wrote a book optimized for a company of one, which is yourself, right? So it's very, very popular with entrepreneurs, and it's very popular with middle companies, and it's popular with large companies. And my cases actually, or not my cases, but my stories all are over. But I'll give you sort of an idea. Change sucks is an individual thing. How to be a leader is an individual thing. How to manage your time is an individual thing, right? So in effect, the two things what people found amazingly about my book was they said, you wrote a book that is COVID-19 optimized, which is number one. And number two, you wrote a book that increasingly begins to believe that companies are nothing but an aggregation of individual people, which is what I've always believed. So if your company is of 1, 10, 100, or 10,000, this book should be relevant.
So I'll take another question, which is basically coming from, again, small enterprise. There's Brigadier Khalid Dasmal from Dubai, and he is a new startup after his retirement. And he is asking a question that, do you think that we should encourage working from remote in order to reduce cost? And how is working from remote can make the process efficient? You talked about in your speech, you also have a blog on distributed workforce. So what kind of suggestions you have for Brigadier Khalid?
Sure. So so Brigadier, if you Google a company called Automatic, it's called Automatic. It's the people who own WordPress, and they also now own Tumblr. It's a company that is the way I think the future of workplaces should be. It's a company that's got 1,500 employees, all of whom have worked remotely for the last 5 years or 7 years. And it's a very successful company. But they've not really worked remotely. They have supposedly worked remotely. And I think this is what the future is. So the nice thing about remote workplace is it basically brings you flexibility, it brings you diversity, and it brings you often cost reduction. And the cost reduction is good for the company. The flexibility is good for the people. The diversity is good for both the people and the company. So that's number one. However, there are some downsides of this. The downsides is focus, which is the ability to work. And I put up a cartoon on my Twitter handle, which is, am I working from home or am I living at work? So the idea is focus. The second basically is learning. How do you learn? It's very hard to learn completely remotely. We're learning that from schools, etc. Sometimes you have to, there are things you learn just by looking and seeing, which aren't necessarily taught in a book or in an online course. And the third is, how do you build relationships? So somebody basically said, right now, all of this is working because many of us have built capital and relationships already, but over time, those will build down. So in that, what they've basically done is the importance of conversation. So when you even talk on screen, it's conversations. But that company basically makes sure that all of its employees or teams meet once every month, right? So they actually meet once every month and they decide on the location and the company pays for it. So people go and they take a vacation together or get together at a place and they figure out how to fund it and the company funds them. And so what is happening is once a month, people are getting together in teams. When they actually are conversing, they make sure that they have a conversation in addition to just having meetings and announcements. And so they've combined the best of the worlds. And I truly do believe, by the way, in fact, this morning, I got up very much earlier than even this, which is at 5 a.m., because I run a podcast for Publicis where every week I talk to someone global. So today I was talking to someone who's a CEO in Korea to try to understand, what's going on in Korea, because in effect, Korea is ahead of the rest of the world in the opening up. And there is absolutely no doubt that the life we're living in after lockdown will be very different, at least for 18 to 24 months till there is a vaccine. So even when people go back to work, 80% of the time they won't be at work.
Thanks, Rishad. I will take the last question. I still have 3 minutes left in the session, and I'm forced to take this question because it comes from my editor. So I still have to, be doing another podcast after some time. So she talks about, artificial intelligence and autonomous transformation of the work. Do you see that who will win the race between machine and man?
Yes, I'll give you the answer, which I'm 100% certain about. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Machine plus man.
Machine plus man.
Yes, by the way, machine plus man beats machine every time. And that's even true with the Go player and all these things. So when you take the best Go player, they lose to the machine. But you take the best Go player plus the machine, they beat the machine.
Thanks, Rishad. That's been wonderful, interacting with you, and especially, our geospatial community. Actually, we did not talk about geospatial, which is great today. And,
perfect. And for people who want to stay connected, I'm at Rishad at Gmail, I'm at Rishad Tobaccowala on LinkedIn, and at Rishad at Twitter.
Yeah,
so you can always have all of those.
The slide up there. And
then if you want to get my book, if you've got Amazon in your country, search for Rishad. In India, it's only available on a Kindle. You don't have to get Kindle, but free Kindle because the books are sold out. But most of the countries, it's more or less in stock. And then everywhere excepting Iran and China, if you don't have an Amazon, if you go to gloss.com, you can basically get it.
Thank you, Rishad, and thanks to everyone who has taken time out of their busy schedules to join us this evening, morning, and afternoon. And stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll keep in touch, and we'll bother Rishad again sometime with more ideas. He's been doing a lot of blogging at this time. So if you go to rishadtobaccowala.com, you'll actually see a lot of new blogs coming up from Rishad.
Yeah, so that's rishadt.wordpress.com will take you directly, or Rishad Tobaccowala will take you there too. Thank you. Thank you for your time and for everybody's time and for your invitation.
And thanks to Harsha and the team for putting up all this together. Thanks a lot.